We often think that the process is, it's something we have to gut out.
Mm.
We got to just get through the process. No. Process is life.
In this era of distraction, burnout, and chronic stress, where you feel overwhelmed, powerless, and isolated, you need mental fitness to dial you in so you can find the proper signal where you feel your best and perform your best. Our topic today is best practices for human flourishing. Welcome to the most exciting adventure of your life. Welcome to a new way of living, and welcome to season 2 of the Fierce Planet Adventures podcast.
Hi, I'm Casey.
And I'm Andy. And we're on a mission to inspire and guide 1 million people to live a life of purpose, passion, and self-mastery through the 5 mountains of cutting-edge human development and mental fitness.
Damon Valentino runs Side Street Coaching. He's a well-respected high-performance coach and group facilitator. He has a master's degree in the field of sports and performance psychology and is a certified flow educator and trainer. Damon has led programs around the globe and offers a variety of digital training to individuals, teams, and organizations. His clients include executives and managers, Olympians and professional athletes, best-selling authors, D1 athletes, coaches, and parents. Welcome, Damon.
Thank you so much, Casey. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Very honored to have you on.
Yeah.
And excited to get into today's topic. It's a lot of good stuff. But we kind of like to do a little icebreaker and ask you, what are you most excited about in your life right now?
Right now, probably most excited about being vulnerable. And I say that with full respect to how terrifying that is, but that I think especially in this past year and a half or so, taking some of the polish off of my practice, my presentation, and letting people in a little bit more, I think has been one of the most profound personal practices. And actually, I think it's really affected me in a positive way when I work with others as well.
Powerful stuff there.
That's great. Yeah. Right. I can relate to some extent with that statement. Being authentic and showing up and being open to it can be scary and terrifying, right? But that's kind of where the magic or the traction really happens in life, right? When we show up as our authentic selves and just let it be. So Damon, human flourishing, mental fitness, potential, and flow, they're all buzzwords we're hearing right now. Why do you think we're seeing this shift towards the mental aspect of training versus the physical aspect?
I mean, it's such a great question. And, I think, when I think about the arc of working with a specific client in my world over the past decade or so, the first phase was always education. And I say that because we all have such a connection to physical fitness, and those metrics are very obvious. We all want to lose weight. We want to get stronger. But, mental, whenever you start with the word mental, just societally, it's been a bit taboo. There are a lot of people out there that don't want to feel like they have any weakness, or to touch into some spaces that maybe are invisible. Like, how do you even measure any of this? So what I've noticed, though, is that education piece, sometimes, people would buy into it and they'd get it and they'd say, okay, let's get rolling. And sometimes there would be some distance. But what I've noticed certainly in kind of the COVID era, I very rarely begin with education any longer, because I think people realize that they are in that pot of boiling water, and we all are in that pot of boiling water in a way, and it creates a little psychological safety to say, hey, what is this mental fitness thing? How do I work this mind-body connection? And so I really think that at the end of the day, and we've also seen a lot of stars, leaders in sports in particular, say, hey, I'm not all right. And if I'm not all right mentally, then I'm not going to be able to perform physically. So I think with some of the leadership we're seeing from the top down, so nowadays what I've seen post-COVID is that people are no longer wanting to be sold on, hey, exactly what this is. They're not coming in with skepticism. They're coming in with trauma and grief and overwhelm and burnout. And so, I think for me personally, what I've really noticed is that I've had to shift my own coaching paradigm from, okay, we don't need to get into the education so much. We need to get into a bit more of the nervous system regulation. And so I think mental fitness, based on my understanding of it, is really how do we access those, sensations and emotions in a way where we can interpret them through a mindset, for example, that allows us to take the next best step, be a bit more optimal. And, I think the buzz in our field has been around peak performance for so long. And I think peak is the very top, and it's fleeting. And so now I really think it's a lot more about optimal performance. And that means that everyone's in the game. It's not just for the high flyers any longer. This is for basically any human being who's trying to, bail water out of the boat and remember that they can put the sail up as well.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. That's a wonderful description. Yeah, so post-COVID, or I guess we're still in the midst of it to some degree, I, kind of rehashing what you just said, is so many of us thought we were at one place in our lives. And when COVID hit, it made us examine where we really are. And many of us came to realize that, wow, we maybe don't have the resilience that we thought we did. And now where do we go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The way I've kind of framed it in my own mind when I sketched out is, most of us live in the performance zone. And I think real life feels like life or death in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, sort of the ancient part of our own brain doesn't know the difference between these things, right? So as a person who's worked in sort of high intensity performance, working with people who there's a lot to lose, this is something that I'm familiar with. But I don't necessarily think, those who have been, going to their Wall Street job or working in Silicon Valley, or even trying to raise a family, have necessarily been able to frame it that way. But it's actually pretty true, right? I mean, the performance zone is, we're always on, especially in this social media society. And then we want to scurry into the comfort zone of scrolling Facebook, binge watching Netflix, eating chips, having a couple beers, all the stuff that kind of takes us away from that other zone. And so I think what I feel really excited about and passionate about is really creating a container where we can practice. And I think that practice, the element of practice, what does it do? It stokes intrinsic motivation, right? I'm running some experiments. I'm the expert. It's N=1, right? And it also really makes us more curious. And when we're curious, we sort of kick on the systems in our brain that turn down the heat on the fear systems. And so we're not doing destructive things in the comfort zone. We're actually in this practice zone where there are productive things. And I just think the baseline element for most people, if we're making a little bit of progress and we're able to sort of see that, or at least know we're doing the reps, that feels good. And I think right now we need something to feel good about.
Absolutely. Yeah, what struck me what you just said is, a little bit of progress. And I think sometimes folks get trapped in that it's all or nothing. I need to be the 0 to hero. And I need to, where our philosophy is, if you're doing 1% better every day, that has a compounding effect. And that's where kind of the vertical or the accelerated development happens, right? Is just that little bit every single day. So thank you for sharing that.
When I think about energy and vitality, I think about a kid. They have the energy to play, run around, climb things. That energy that feels like you just can't contain yourself. It's the stuff we've always wished they could just bottle up and sell to us, right? Well, this company's found a way to do just that. Amare's Happy Juice Pack. Mood, motivation, energy, things our bodies can naturally produce when both our guts and our brains are happy and communicating. And we can actually improve that process of communication across the axis of the gut and the brain. This is cutting edge science.
This is game-changing information. This is where science meets soul. This is Amare, and we're helping people feel better naturally. Boost your serotonin and GABA. Balance your neurotransmitters. Nourish your gut. The things that make you want to do. Start feeling better the natural way. Check out the links in the show notes for discounts and more information.
Something else you said there about people in the mindset of being beyond the education piece. I find that really interesting, that people don't really need to be sold on this idea anymore, but they need ways to take action in it and actually feel these changes and these benefits. What are you using in your practice or with your clients right now to help this process?
Such a great question. And I totally agree with you. I think we need to drop down from sort of the intellectual understanding into the emotional, the embodied cognition, where we have a lot of wisdom and data. So one thing that I do is I have the people that I work with take a daily survey. And it's really to stoke that interoceptive awareness, wanting to know more about what's happening inside. And it also syncs with some of the latest neuroscience around, number one, our brain making predictions, and it's making those predictions based on past experiences. So it's too much energy, too much complexity for the brain to assess everything that's happening and say, oh, based on all of this, we will respond with this, So it really kind of like gets a snapshot and says, oh, we've been here before. We should dump a little cortisol right now. This is, we've seen this game before. So for me, one of the key things that I've been trying to do is create some emotional granularity. And that's just a fancy way of saying, instead of saying I'm mad, glad, stressed, upset, very, generic terms to describe oneself, I give them a long list of words: irritated, tired, overwhelmed, it's a very long list of words. And once a day I ping them and say, hey, how you doing right now? What are you feeling right now? And so they have to actually be very descriptive, very nuanced about how they feel. And then I say, where, if you could identify in your body, where are you most feeling that? Is it your head? Is it your shoulders, your heart, your gut, or other? You can choose something else yourself. So I find that practice is really, really beneficial on that 1% better type of model. And then I ask, okay, so what storyline are you connected to right now? Because I want us to tease apart and detach a little bit from that interpretation of what we feel with the actual sensation of what we feel. And then with all of that stuff, and I know it sounds like a long process, but it's really about 1 minute. After all that, I say, all right, well, based on all that, what do you think the best thing you can do right now? The most productive thing? Is it take a nap? Is it drink some water? Is it call a friend? Is it, And so what I, at the bottom line is more awareness about what's happening within, and then more control over how to respond. And I think that, to me, that cycle, that process is really, it's really impactful. And then after 30 days, you can sort of look over that data and say, hey, let's look at your trend lines here. And people really love that because it's their life in action. And I think that is something that really does make people feel like, wow, this is my unique experience.
Yeah, actually gives people a way to more or less take responsibility for their self as well. Yeah. Kind of amazing what you can do when you have a literal separation between the unconscious drivers. Take control of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So response versus reaction. What do you have any other tools or techniques that you can share that will bring awareness to that one key pivotal moment of decision? There's so many times in life where we react almost unconsciously, like you were just describing, right? And that awareness piece is great. What I hear you saying is you're prompting them. Do they get into the flow or into the rhythm of prompting themselves to do that same action?
I think eventually they do. But to your point, I think it's a great question. There has to be some self-compassion. in there, because we're all going to mess up, and we're also going to all react based on that 95% beneath the level of our own awareness. Who knows why I was hurt when somebody said this thing to me? Maybe something happened when I was a kid, or maybe that's just kind of like a defense mechanism. So really normalizing that process, I think, is very, very important. And in a way, when you reframe the game that way, you're building that into the process. So instead of, oh my gosh, I just popped off and I reacted, and now it's guilt and shame, and now it's, it's like pouring water on that kindling, that small little fire that you're building. That then you're basically turned off from this process. Whereas I really love to normalize struggle and normalize these reactive tendencies. And so then what happens? Then there's a 1-2 of, oh, wow, I just popped off. Oh, that's right. That's okay. I can take a breath now. I can put my hand on my heart, and I can ask myself, all right, like, how do we want to respond now? So it's really not this constant state of perfection. It's that when we get knocked off course, can we refocus on those things that make us feel like we're back in that productive game?
Great. It's not a matter of, like you just stated, it's not a matter of if we get knocked off course, it's going to be when we get knocked off course. We're human. We make these mistakes. We trip over our own feet from time to time. And having that self-compassion and saying, you know what, gosh, I screwed up. It's okay. I own it. What do I do now? Move on. One of the other things that you mentioned there also, Damon, was shame, guilt, very low energy states, right? States that if you stay in those that mindset too long, can have a very negative effect on your day, on your week, on your life. So having the ability to recognize when it's happening and shift from those states opens up a lot of energy to be focused on positive things in your life.
Couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely right. And that just that makes me think about gratitude. Gratitude to me is one of the key places that I like to go with anyone I work with. I work with some Paralympic athletes that were getting ready for Tokyo, for example. And, the last message that we imparted on that team was gratitude. Grateful for the opportunity, grateful for the nerves and pressure, grateful sitting, up on the blocks. And what does that do really? It is what we have. It's us appreciating the moment. It's not toxic positivity. I hope I get this. It's not wishful thinking. If I hope I win the gold. But we as human beings, the deck is stacked against us in so many ways, and we've evolved to become, we're nervous Nellies. We worry. Danger is everywhere, right? That's the Velcro for us, and all of that good mojo is kind of the Teflon, where it just sort of slides right by. I don't know how many times I've met with somebody and I said, "Wow, that was an amazing job," and almost in a snappy way, they will say, "Well, yeah, I was supposed to do that." Like, whoa, TO.
Yeah.
I don't know, let's take a pause here. So gratitude lowers inflammation. It gives us a higher pain tolerance. And it makes us appreciate the moment, appreciate what we're in, whether we screwed up or not. There's always something. And so it really kind of pushes back against, our tendency to be negative with our thinking and to ruminate, over that old tired storyline. So I really do think that, it's not a soft skill. Gratitude is incredibly important, and it's one of the primary things that I try to get people to train up.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. Reframing the mind and your perspective of things can have such a profound effect. I know it certainly did for us starting a gratitude practice. So that, and it helps get you out of that, to your point, out of the thinking mind, the anxious worries about the future or the regretful memories or the past. Something else I saw that you were kind of working on or in right now that also helps get you out of that kind of ego-driven mind, flow. Could you tell us a little about what you're doing in that realm?
This episode of Fierce Planet Adventures podcast is brought to you by 5 Mountain Coaching, licensed Unbeatable Mind Coaching, integrated accelerated vertical growth across 5 domains of cutting-edge development designed by retired Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine. Learn the Big 4 skills of mental toughness and resiliency. Discover the 6 pillars of performance. Test your mettle with custom-created crucibles across all 5 domains. Visit 5mountaincoaching.com to schedule your free 1-hour Unbeatable Mind Coaching session. That's the number 5, mountaincoaching.com. Begin your journey to becoming unbeatable today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's timely. I want to send my condolences to the founder of Flow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was just passed away this past week at 87 years old. He's a Hungarian American who coined the term flow. And in flow, he found back at doing research at the University of Chicago, way back when, was that no matter what your medium was or your profession, when he found that his subjects were able to be completely immersed in what it was they were doing, that there was a sense of happiness, genuine happiness, and just joy in performing the actions. So we're no longer in that results game where, if I get the raise, then I'll be happy. It was assembly line in Chicago, but full of life, full of that feeling of being truly alive. And so it turns out there's like a neurochemical stamp on flow where all of our feel-good neurochemicals sort of dump at the same time. And it's when action and awareness merge, when what we're doing, we're not thinking about what we're doing, we're just doing what we're doing. And there's that inner critic, that nagging voice is very, very prominent in our lives. And I think, so prominent that it's almost invisible. We don't necessarily even often know that we're directing our attention or our energy based on our inner dialogue. And so flow, when we're in this state, literally the front part of our brain goes offline, and we're no longer stamping time, and we're no longer connected to language and voice. So it's a beautifully, it's a wonderful feeling, right? And in my space, I trained with some of the world leading organizations, the Flow Research Collective, Flow Genome Project, and it's not rocket science, this stuff. It's very basic in its nature. But the capacity to be able to build your level of creativity, of innovation, you have a higher level of pain tolerance, for example, your pattern recognition kind of goes through the roof. So, forward thinking companies were starting to use this and seeing 10, 20, 30x of creativity and innovation. And certainly the Red Bull athletes have kind of dominated that space early on. But it's now kind of found its way into daily life. And it turns out that there's a cycle which goes struggle, release, flow, and then recovery. So we need to struggle first. And so we really, what the research has shown is that, a lot of times people struggle and then they have this negative emotional reaction. Like, banging the hand on the ground, I'm never going to get this. And that just is an immediate flow blocker, right? You're now kind of kicking yourself out of that process. But so what we're really doing is trying to learn new pattern recognition. We're trying to build new muscle memory. And if we can do all those things without getting that frustration, dejection, anger, and then reaching some sort of breaking point where we're like, okay, I got to tap out from this for a little while, and then get into this release phase where, some people go gardening, some people go hiking, some people go listen to music, anything but. Thing is while you're doing those other things, your brain's still working on that problem. And so that when you kind of come back to it, that what we've seen is like, these are the conditions where people can really then kind of really drop into that flow state. And what is that flow state really? It's when we feel our best and perform our best. But it turns out it takes a lot, it's expensive, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of chemicals. And so we need to recover from that. And so in my process, we need to make sure that we're normalizing struggle and prioritizing recovery. And if we do that, the rest kind of takes care of itself. So that's a little bit on it. And there's states of flow. There's intensities. I think people think flow of doing a 360 off a mountain. Where they find flow the most is in a deep conversation, right? So I'm hearing you, you're hearing me, we're together. I'm not caught up in my own storyline. We're connected. The chemicals that we're dumping are feeling good. And as pack animals, we're really feeling like safe in our bond. So what I've really noticed is that creating these conditions for microflow, these small moments, is a really potent way for people to have these little pockets of time where they feel good. And I think, if anything, if we could frame this era in terms of the challenges, I see overwhelm, I see isolation, I see hopelessness, powerlessness, right? And so if we turn that coin over, overwhelm, reframe the game, change the rules a little bit. And so if you can find these 5-10 minutes where you're in microflow a day, that's a nice antidote to all that overwhelm.
Yeah, microflow, that's very interesting to me. Reframing struggle or reframing the difficulty, how do you do that? How do you reframe that in your mind?
I mean, it's a great question, and I think we have to create the space, and also allow people the patience to not just cram this part of the process through. So really opening the container up and saying, okay, let's take 30 days. And there is something about this concept of time when we define the playground that can be really safe. And it can put us, as I said earlier, into this practice realm where it's not so hot, where we don't feel like, if I don't stick the landing on this one, I'm going to be, fed to the sharks. And so there was a really great study in the field of education where they took 5-year-olds and they had a 3 football field space of grass, and it had no fencing around it. And they put their teachers in the middle of that space. And the researchers brought the 5-year-olds out with no directions and just let them kind of on the edge of that space. Where do you think that those kids went?
Oh boy.
No direction and no borders.
I'm going to guess they gravitated towards the other people.
Yeah. So without that container, without that safety, they went with where they knew they would be safe. Mm-hmm. They did the same experiment a month later, and they put a fence around that same field. And again, no directions. These are just 5-year-olds. And they kind of opened the gate. Boom, they scattered everywhere. So they felt safe enough to explore. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we say things like, hey, let's take 30 days and create a relationship with struggle. To me, that's a key word, relationship. We're never getting rid of anything. Mm-hmm. We're never conquering anything. These are very aggressive terms or passive terms, right? But the relationship, we can sort of transmute that, and we can see struggle as opportunity, right? We can see, Ryan Holiday wrote that great book, The Obstacle is the Way, right? And, when you reframe these obstacles, these quote unquote barriers, and then you look at them with a fresh lens of, oh, wow, this is tough. What am I getting out of this? What is it drawing out of me? What clues am I learning from this process? Now we have a different relationship with struggle. And then it's something that we can flip and kind of see it as an opportunity. So that's I would say, number one, create that container, and then cultivate and become more intimate in the relationship with these forces that are at play. So, a lot of my early influence comes from Eastern philosophy. I ran a tennis club in all of my 20s. I grew up in the competitive tennis world and full ride D1 school and all that, and wanted to go pro and everything like that. And, that fizzled out later in my college career. And I became I ran a club on a fancy island out east. But I had a bunch of time off every year. So I had 5-6 months off every year. And I found myself gravitating towards going to Asian countries and sort of predominantly in the kind of a Buddhist line, and I understood in a sense in those 20s, the difference between rugged individualism and more of a collective connection to others. Mm-hmm. And, just a real quick, if I could tell you just a quick story where it really kind of pinged me. I was in northern India, and at the time I was working, I was teaching current events at a monastery, a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. How I found my way into this, I'm not exactly sure. But, day one, I'm sitting on the ground and there's 50 novice monks aged 7 to 18, all in a big circle. And one of the lamas came over with a giant bowl of gruel, basically for breakfast. And one kid ate some and passed it along. And in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, that bowl's not that big. And this one bowl is going to get all the way around to 50, all of us. They had the discipline and the connection to know their portion. And in that moment, I was thinking to myself, no way would this ever go down in a San Francisco school, right? Like this is never, that thing would be gone after 2 kids. So I think that framing is really interesting to me, where there's a different sort of way to see how to be a human being on planet Earth. And so I think this idea of struggle doesn't square nicely with the rugged individualistic mindset or mind frame. We're a bootstraps society. Mm-hmm. We are the society that you can get anything you want in this world. You can be anything you want. Well, that's a lot of pressure. And that's a very overwhelming thing to say. And so I think back to that guilt and shame, a lot of us feel like, what did I really make of myself? Or we feel like we butt up against something and we're like, oh no, this path is locked down for me. So I think, being able to kind of regulate the nervous system and realize that we don't need to close ourselves down. When we get into this fight flight state, we go from about 180-degree peripheral vision down to about 30. And now we're living in this struggle tunnel. And so really, I think step one with this normalization of, hey, we're going to practice this over a month. And also sort of the emotional stamp of, hey, this is a relationship. This isn't something we conquer. That allows us to stay more open to possibilities and opportunities. And I think within that really is where the self-determination, and the intrinsic motivation to take that 1% jump, because that we need to feel that sense of safety, but also that sense of exploration and adventure. So that's a long-winded way, I think, of talking about struggle, but I do think it's important to take the time on that one,
Yeah, absolutely. A couple things resonated with me from what you just said is, this is a journey. This is not a one and done. This isn't something we conquer. It's going to be part of who we become, or who we hope to become. And with the work, with the attention to this, we will become over time. You had mentioned the 30-day time frame, which is, I think, a really valid time frame. Is there any magic around that, or any scientific, which I guess would be the opposite of magic, corollary, or is there any data to support the 30 days?
If you've been listening to our podcast or following us on socials, it's probably no surprise to you that I've been dealing with back issues for many years. And I want to take a moment just to tell you about something that I found that's helped me with my flexibility and durability and mobility. And that's called Kokoro yoga, somatic warrior training. It's not just yoga. It also includes Tai Chi, Qigong, visualization, meditation, and breathwork practices such as Fit Warrior, fighting warrior, which incorporates functional fitness and some martial arts movements. And it's been just a really great way for me to maintain some flexibility and durability as I move through our challenges when we go and do Spartan races and climb mountains. So if this sounds like it's something that could help you out, check it out. The link's in the show notes.
Yeah, there is some loose data around neuroplasticity being, I'm not really buying into that as I'm not writing that in Sharpie, if you will. But that said, I do think that 30 days is a decent amount of time, roughly in general, for us to feel like we could potentially adopt a new habit or create some behavioral change if we do the reps, right? None of this stuff is magical thinking. This is very much about consistency. But I also just think that sometimes you have to meet a society where it's comfortable. And we really, I think, are comfortable in this 30-day vernacular. Mm-hmm. So no, I don't think that there's any super magic statement that I would make about that. But I do think that we have the capability of changing our brain. And what I say all the time is, whatever you're doing, you're getting better at. And so if you think about that, do you want the wiring inside of your brain? Do you want the Autobahn, the super highway, to be sitting on the couch eating Doritos and ruminating about all the things that you haven't gotten, or this concern about what you hope to get in the future? Or, and in which case the country road or the small path is going to be those productive habits. How do you make that country road more like a highway? And I think that when people can latch onto that, like, wow, there's really something anatomical that's going on in this process for me. I love to show little images of, neuroplasticity in action and neurons firing together. I think that imagery is really powerful because it does look like magic. In a lot of ways we are very, we have so much capacity. And I think that, who are we not to play big? And so I want to really stoke that in people. But that just happens to be that container. And that's the container that we've chosen in most of our programming, working with communities in more of a digital setting.
I think this is a great point here. And I'd like to ask you to talk about Interflow, which I think is a new project you're working on or have developed, which I think meshes very well with this topic of flow that we're talking about, we're discussing.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. Yeah, we, it's funny. I love language, and I also sort of scorn it. Right. I mean, language really instructs a lot about what sort of emotions that we're going to bring up and which directions we're going to go. And so I think it's really important to choose language wisely. And so we put two words together that my partner is in organizational development, and he's facilitated teams and groups and, governmental and executive groups for 30 years. And I come a little bit more from the high performance health psychology side of things. And so what we realized was that those worlds really do have an intersection. And, flow has been sort of if you have the Venn diagram, flow is sort of our meeting point in between. Intero is to make whole, to integrate, and flow is to feel your best and to perform your best. And so we put those two words together as a way to inspire people to think about, oh, wow, as a system, we can integrate, but but individually, we can do all of that as well. So the basic arc of our practice is basically to go in and listen. You have to meet people where they're at. We believe that psychological safety is the number one metric for performance. Low psych safety, low performance. Everyone's sort of playing a role at the office. And, so engagement's down, and, the capacity to create and innovate goes way down. We sort of want to get in there, not get in trouble, not get found out, and get out of there, right? And so we want to open that container, make that safe container for people to explore ideas, with the hope that, these are things that are going to help you individually and they're going to help us as a group. Flow also has another component called group flow. And Keith Sawyer did some great work. He has a great book called Group Genius. And there are some metrics. There's shared risk, blending of egos, clear goals, a lot of these things, some improvisation, playing yes and these are really important ways for us to start to stoke our ability to work together. But our program basically is a live workshop or a virtual workshop in this era. And then in that 30-day model, we have a platform where people jump on, and we really are prompting and encouraging people to shine a light on these metrics. So we have a daily inspirational quote, for example. We have an oath on there, which is basically kind of like mindset training, trying to respond. How do you need to respond today? There's a section that looks a little bit like Facebook, where you can share some of your mini wins and your resilience and actions practices. And you can high five and comment off of other people's posts. And then there's some private sections where you can kind of keep your own journal. And then we have a gratitude scroll on the bottom. So what does it do, right? It's, again, not rocket science, but it starts to train people to pay attention to these things. It's to push back against that 9-to-1 negative thinking. It's to push back about sectioning myself off and just going internal and protecting myself, and starting to see that, hey, I can open up and I can share, and I'm part of this exploration. And oh, by the way, my colleague gave me a high five and made some comment, and now we're in some dialogue about something. So that's sort of the step one, the foundational kind of flagship. And then from there, what we've seen, 2,000-3,000 people later, is that they're more engaged, they're more interested. They've got their sleeves rolled up now, and they get it. They get that, wow, okay, I'm onto something here. And guess what? Back to your point about the process. I think we often think that the process is, it's something we have to gut out. We got to just get through the process. No. Process is life. That's the thing. And so I think the transformation happens where the process starts to feel good. It starts to feel good day 7, day 9, to kind of pop this app open. And there's not really a curriculum per se. There's us with some science in there, but the curriculum is each individual's life. And that is also something that I've really noticed a lot lately. Nobody really wants to be told what to do. Some people want to be told what to do to try to get there, but they often are kind of backwards with, oh, I just want to take the magic pill. I want the silver bullet. Give me the answer. Make it go away, right? All that. But I think that the people that need that sort of tender stoking, and the imagery I see is a small little fire. You can't just dump a bunch of logs on there, right? You got to be mindful about how are you placing this kindling, and are you adding a little oxygen? But that whole process, I don't know if you're fire builders, that for me, that's one of my little flow triggers. I love tending to a small fire because it does plunge me into the moment, and I'm really aware of everything that's going on. And so we've seen some really amazing transformations. Teams that were at each other's throats are starting to be more supportive. People who are really kind of closed off are starting to share more. And those introverts out there that have a lot of great ideas but don't talk in the meetings, those people are starting to really let their wisdom out, because there is a little bit more of this safety in this platform. So yeah, I encourage anybody. Of course, I'm a huge fan of what we've done, but and the curriculum can be customized as well. So
beautiful.
Yeah, in the spirit of meeting people where they're at, I think that's also been a really big boon for us.
That's great. What I really liked about what you just said is that we're seeing each other, or allowing the space to see each other as human, my words. But I think that's one of the things that we're missing, or has kind of fallen out in our society, is everybody is so stressed out, agitated, scared, maybe even of what's going to happen next, and we've put up these blinders and are just focused on our little portion of the world, and we've, in some regards, stopped seeing each other as fellow human beings, and possibly as now obstacles or threats to our safety and our security. So allowing that space is just brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I love hearing you say that, Andy. And there's a lot of othering going on right now. And that, we've been through presidential election, the George Floyd stuff, obviously the climate and fires and all of these elements. And we really reached out initially to frontline workers. So we had state police and nurses. One of our main populations right now is in the healthcare world, with healthcare workers and fire, police, and EMTs. And you can imagine the burnout and the fear and the sort of the lack of fairness in those communities. And so to be seen, to be, for me to understand you, I have to see you and as a full human being. And you're right. I think the way our society has been tending is that we get these little caricatures and these small, cardboard cutouts of what somebody is without the full picture. And so if I'm really going to develop some empathy around who you are, I need to know a little bit more about you. And so, back to my initial word of vulnerability, I think Maya Angelou said it, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. Mm-hmm. And I think for us that, that's on my desk, that's my number one thing is, doesn't matter what, fancy science I know. But that person we need to develop trust and rapport, and trust and rapport happens in small moments in our day-to-day lives. I really firmly believe that transitions in life are a place that we really go to, those places where we go on autopilot. When I'm brushing my teeth, I'm thinking about my day, right? If I'm driving to work, I'm listening to a podcast, or I'm talking to someone else, or my mind is already racing, but I'm not really there. And so I think that where we like to go with sort of the mindful mindset training is be in your body, present moment awareness. Bring your mind and your body into the same place at the same time. Feel that brush on your gums, hear the sounds. And I think that these little small things, these little drip, drip, drips, these end up being the tether that bind our life together. And so instead of blazing past them, we're really trying to shine a light on them.
So mindfulness, I want to bring this back around to the beginning here with flow. Is there a difference between mindfulness and flow?
Yeah. I mean, mindfulness, of course, there's some different variations of mindfulness. There's sort of the fixed mindfulness where you're just kind of on breath, for example, more of an open awareness of, I'm sitting on the front porch and my thoughts are the cars driving by, and I'm just sort of watching all of that, setting kind intention. I think those are sort of the big three that have shown a lot of very prominent health benefits. Flow is a bit more about, I have a very clear goal that's right in front of me, and I've hit the sweet spot in terms of the challenge and my skill level. It turns out it's somewhere around 4% greater. So if you set a challenge for yourself that's just a little out of your reach, I mean, you can sort of think about it. If you're on your tiptoes trying to grab something, it's just, you're there. But every bit of you has to focus in on that you can't drift while you're doing it. So if something is too hard, we become anxious. And if it's too easy, we become bored. So there's this flow channel, and roughly 4% harder than what you feel you're capable of doing. So clear goal, setting that goal just a little above your level, and that really drives your focus into the present moment. And flow follows focus. So once we get ourselves really engaged in that particular activity with that autonomy of, I can get this, I'm right there, that's really kind of sets the conditions for us, with a little bit of risk, potentially a little novelty. Sometimes it's nice to kind of put yourself into that position where I haven't really seen this before. I'm a big traveler. Travel is a huge flow trigger for me. You can imagine why, going into something new and you're alive, your senses are really engaged. So flow is not necessarily a kind of a meta skill where you're a subject and object split, right? Where mindfulness is a bit more, I'm aware of what I'm training my awareness on. Flow, you're in that activity, and you're the way I frame it is you're inside the experience. And if I work with a professional athlete, for example, that's a phrase that I'll say before that person goes out to play, like, hey, get inside the experience. Don't analyze the experience. Get inside the experience. And so that once, we've all been there, it's our birthright to feel this. We're wired to get into flow. And I wanted to say one more thing about flow is that, that the science these days is evolving to show that flow came about based on a scarcity of resources. So when, early humans were lacking something that they needed, they would either fight or flee away from that over those remaining resources, or they would innovate and create and make more resources. And so I feel like this is a really important kind of fundamental crossroads in our society. We're fighting over a lot of scarcity right now. Mm-hmm. And what I think flow does, what I think, these types of programs, your programs, what they do is they make people show up with a better version of themselves, with their nervous systems more in the present moment, feeling and hearing and seeing one another. And in that process, the byproduct, I think, is that we can make more resources. We can innovate and create. And I think bottom line, that to me, that's one of the philosophical stamps that I would put on what gives life meaning in the first place. So.
Very beautifully put.
Thank you, Casey.
The direction, it feels like the world is going, and you hear so much of the negative, but I've just reading and seeing so many things like this being presented to the world to help people rise above those constant stories everyone tells us or we tell ourselves. And like you said, creating that space for people just to explore who they really are, being able to share that with more people and let that just ripple out is just going to have such a profound effect on the world, I think. So important right now.
Wow. Yeah. Well said. I totally agree. I think I was scrolling through and I think I came across an Instagram post that I believe one of you put up, and it was this flower encased in a like a frozen droplet of water. And it, I saw it and I read, the post that you had put, and it was this really beautiful moment of awe. And, I think that we often, put this stamp on, social media and just the digital world as some of the negative elements that it has. And it sure does have those things. But, that moment left an imprint within my own nervous system where I stopped and I stared at that picture, and it really had I felt it, right? And so you put something out there that you felt, and I came across it and had a moment with it as well. And I think more people looking for these small, beautiful moments and expressing and sharing those things is really, those are the seeds that we need to water. And so I thank you both for doing what you're doing as well, because I see it from afar and it really does have an impact. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Very much
Beautiful.
Appreciated hearing that. So where can folks find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, right now I'd say the websites are probably the best spot. I'm not sure if you all in the show notes, maybe my own personal coaching is Side Street Coaching, and then interoflow.com is our group and a virtual site as well. And we're in a remodel with both of those things. So But yeah, certainly folks can go there and get connected with us. And I guess the last thing I'll say about that is, I think that what I'd like to do is to invite people just to reach out. I think sometimes it's if I reach out, this guy's going to try to sell me on something, or is there some kind of commitment? I'm genuinely interested in where people are at. So I encourage anyone to send an email. I get those emails. I read them and feel them and respond to them. And so if you're at all interested, if any of this resonates, feel free to reach out. I'd love to make more connections. So.
Fantastic. Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to chat with us. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate
so
you
much good
as
stuff.
well. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Go
Damon.
win.
Take care.
Friends, if you found the Fierce Planet Adventures podcast helpful, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes or your podcast platform of choice. It helps others find our podcast.
If you screenshot your review and tag us on Instagram, we'll send you a classic Fierce Planet Adventures sticker. For your water bottle, cooler, car, send us a direct message with your mailing address on Instagram, and we'll send you that sticker right out.
Thanks for joining us, and live fiercely.